Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this talk. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today, my name is Antoinette Clemetson, and I am the fishery specialist with New York Sea Grant. My area of responsibilities, it's really marine fisheries. That includes recreational fisheries and commercial fisheries. And as Jennifer mentioned, I'm also doing some involved with shellfish aquaculture extension. So for this evening's talk, what I'd like to do is give a little overview of the diverse disciplines that we address in marine extension in New York Sea Grant, just to give the students an appreciation of how you can pursue careers in future. I'd also talk a little bit about some of the programs that I'm involved with directly, and I'll try to transition into this whole issue of communicating science and some best tips. And then I'll do a little exercise interactive that's related to communicating science. And to wind it off, I'll talk a little bit about how it is I got to where I am. So if you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to just try to get my attention, raise your hand, and I'll try to remember to repeat the questions for the recording and try to answer your question as best as I can. So before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that within Sea Grant, both the National Sea Grant College Program and New York Sea Grant, we are celebrating our 50th year, which is awesome. This past June, on June 24th here in New York, we had our big celebration, our 50th event. Unfortunately, I had COVID, so I had to miss it, but I heard that it was very well received, and we're looking forward to bringing science to the shore for the next 50 years and beyond. So I will first, one of the things we're try to do is acknowledge the land acknowledgement, and for Cornell, which is the university where I'm affiliated with, our campus is located on traditional homelands of the, so it's pronounced Gayakono and the Haudenosaunee tribes. So, we do like to make this statement. So what is New York Sea Grant? Has anyone who's heard of New York Sea Grant or Sea Grant? Okay, so, all right. So by the end of this, everyone would have heard about Sea Grant. So New York Sea Grant, it's a part of a national program. So there is a Sea Grant College program in every coastal state throughout the US and the Great Lakes. So it's not only a marine program, our focus is also Great Lakes. There's also a program in Puerto Rico, and there's one in Guam. And I should know how many Sea Grants we have, but I keep forgetting the numbers, and I apologize. But you can go to the National Sea Grant College website, and they have that information. So Sea Grant, it's a program that funds research. And our research also includes extension, and there's also the component that supports education. And I'll get a little bit into that momentarily. All of this work and our effort, it's really meant to sustain our coastal communities. We also look at the environmental sustainability and citizen awareness and engagement. That's a part of our mission. As you can see from the graphics, since 1971 here in New York, we've made a substantial investment in our program through the national office. To the tune of almost $170 million. And that's just support in research and extension or outreach, which is the department that I work with. So one of the things I should mention is that our funding comes directly from the National Sea Grant Office. And every year, not every year, every 4 years, each state Sea Grant program, we write a proposal. It's like a grant that we apply for. It's only difference is it's a reoccurring grant, but we still have to write a grant, to get our funding that comes from the national office. So our funds ultimately, they come from NOAA, but we're not NOAA employees. And we try to make that distinction for several reasons. Primarily, when we talk about extension, it's pretty heavily dependent in terms of success on building trust. And unfortunately, many stakeholders, they don't trust government, and they see extension as being that independent broker of information. So that's one of the reasons why, although we're a part of NOAA in that our funds come from NOAA, we don't call ourselves NOAA Sea Grant. So the national office might say NOAA Sea Grant, but at the state level, we just call ourselves the state Sea Grant program. So where are we located? Throughout New York State, and those stars shows our office location. I think we're up to date. Our program within the national network, it's one of the larger programs, and we keep expanding. We do have two main offices. One office is for administration of the research component, and that's based at Stony Brook. And the other part is extension administration, which is headquartered in Ithaca on the main campus. We have 9, was the last count, extension office locations, and that's represented by the stars. So I tried to do a count of our staff, and I think we're up to like 28. And as I said, it's like, we're one of the larger programs within the Sea Grant network, which is, it says a lot. So our program, as I mentioned, we have the extension and the research administration. So we do have a director for the Sea Grant program. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Shuford, and she actually came to us from NOAA 3 years ago, and we love having her there. The associate director is responsible for the extension part, and that is Dr. Catherine Bunting Howarth. And Kathy is based in Ithaca. So one of the reasons why we have this separation in terms of research and extension. So for Sea Grant, the Sea Grant philosophy came out of it's based on land grant, where you have the whole idea behind land grant was that you're trying to land grant came out of after the Great Depression. There was the need to rebuild the American economy. So there was a lot of science being done, and at the time, a lot of the economy was based on agriculture. So what the government did was they, established that extension. I think back in the day, they used to call them extension agents. They've changed that since. But the idea was that these professionals would actually take the research that was being done at the university and bring it out to the farmers, showing them new crops, new machineries, etc. This was all a big effort to rebuild the economy. So that was land grant. Sea Grant, it's the same concept, but the only difference is that our focus is what? Who do you think? Come on, this. Pardon me? Who works the sea? So it would be coastal communities. So it's fishermen, anyone who makes their living from the sea. So that's our focus. So the people we work with, it's a diverse group of stakeholders. We have public sector, so we work with agency managers, etc. We also work with private sector, marinas, people who have coastal businesses. There's also the non-government organizations who we work with. And last but not by no means it's the academia, so researchers. So the thing about Sea Grant is that Sea Grant, each program, we don't have our own researchers. We fund research that's being conducted by researchers that's based at other institutions, not within Sea Grant. So that makes it kind of unique and independent. We also have that other component where we support graduate students and undergraduate students, for their degrees. And for us in New York, the statistics I got was that we've supported 758 such students since our establishment in 1971. And I'll go a little bit into some of these training opportunities momentarily. So I just mentioned that there's this division within, well, it's not a division, they're departments within Sea Grant. And I'll try to explain, the connections, who does what and, what, how it works. So a big part of Sea Grant, it's the research component where we're funding research at both private and state college. So the only rule for the Sea Grant funding is that our researchers must be based within New York. It's all right to have a collaborator outside of New York, but your main PI must be resident in New York. That's the one criteria, maybe one of many, several criteria, but that's, I think, the most important one. So what we do is every 2 years, we put out a call to the research community through our omnibus. Our omnibus, it's the funding that we get from the national office to fund research. So the research cycle, it's over 2 years. And we put the call out every 2 years. We get proposals coming in from researchers. I know Dr. Factor has been, one of our funded researchers, and, several, others at different institutions. The projects, proposals that are come in, they're peer reviewed and, they're scored. It's a competition, really. That's what it boils down to. And researchers who are funded, it's on their merit, the value of their work, the technical merits, etc. And once that is done, then the researchers, they have funds. So our ceiling is up to $240,000 over 2 years. And actually, I keep emphasizing it, within the network, New York Sea Grant is actually one of the higher ceilings. You go to other programs and they will have their omnibus projects an average of like maybe under 100,000. So, for us, we're doing pretty well. I think a part of that goes to the fact that in New York, it's so very expensive to do anything. So, it is what it is. So that's so the other thing too. So for our research budget, I think we have about $1 million every year to play with. So theoretically, you could maybe fund 5 or 6, maybe 7 if you're lucky. So it varies, and there are times we get additional discretionary funding that we can have special calls, and that's happened, several times. So that covers the research part of it. The other part that we have, or another department, is the communications department. And they're the people who, they do our website, they do social media, and they also provide a very valuable support for extension program. People like myself, I'm always trying to pull together workshops, or I publish fact sheets and other types of media. And this is where our communications team comes in. They're very helpful with us. I put up their website, www.nycgrant.org. If you have a chance, you can go look at it. Right now, it's under development because we've been trying for a few years to redesign it, and it's a major undertaking, but you can still try to find things there. So the other department that I would like to talk about this evening, it's the extension. And the part that we have for extension, it's really meant to support research. Our job is to bridge that gap between research and, I call them end users, the people who are going to use that information. Within our program, we have several specialists who are responsible for different disciplines. I myself, I look at the wild capture fisheries, and I also have a counterpart up in the Great Lakes. And her job is to focus on, fishermen up in the Great Lakes and other fisheries issues. We also have the aquaculture portfolio. And that's more for the Marine District, because in New York, our aquaculture upstate has never really developed, and for whatever reason. So for us, aquaculture, it's mostly downstate in the Marine District, and it's primarily shellfishing. And we'll get into that a little bit later. We also have specialists who are addressing coastal processes, erosion, etc., sea level rise, and resilience, flooding and storm preparedness. And last but by no means least, we also have specialists involved with offshore wind energy. And several of these topics are disciplines are new to us, and I'll come back to this momentarily. So the other part of our programs involves partnerships. And for Sea Grant, we've been very fortunate to have very successful partners over the years. Many of our successful partners that brings in funding are through agencies. One of our longest standing partnership is the Long Island Sound Study, which is funded through the EPA. This program, I've been at Sea Grant over 20 years, and I came in and this program was already well established. I think they've been around more than 30 years. And what that means is that the EPA gives funding to this program to support not only staff to do outreach, but also to do their programs. The Long Island Sound, if you're not familiar with the geography of New York, this body of water is shared between Connecticut and New York. So our management is joint, and certainly the Long Island Sound Study is a joint program. Other initiatives that involves agency partnerships are our small grants program. There is one program that's established in the Great Lakes through the New York Ocean and Great Lakes Act. That's what the acronym stands for. And this is a program that's been going on to afford to support small entities, organizations to do work, research, and several have published, this is great. Small is relative. Their ceiling, I think it's like $25,000. But, when you compare that amount to a smaller organization, they can do a lot with that. It's different when you have a small organization as opposed to working in a university setting, which is very expensive. We also have downstate, the Marine District. We have a small grants program that I have administered. That program is funded through a special license plate. And we've only had one cycle. We were talking with the board to do a second cycle, but then COVID hit, but we're going to circle back to that. The other part that is, of interest to you students is our support for formal education. And one of our program is the Canals Scholarship. And I think there's a Canals fellow here who might want to, is she here today? Yes, raise your hand. So you can talk about it later. But the Canals Fellowship, it's really looking at marine policy. And this one is based out of DC at our Silver Springs headquarters at the national office. We also have the Law Policy Fellows, which is another program that is run at the state level. So within New York, we do offer all of the programs that are listed here for education. So to apply for a Canals Scholarship, you usually go through your state Sea Grant program. That's the way it works. And as it says, we're funding graduates at the master's and the PhD level. The last, but by no means least, program that I've been involved with is the community engagement internship. And this one is relatively new. The goal is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now I hear there's access that's been tagged on. I can't keep up with the acronyms, but the idea behind this program is to encourage minorities and underrepresented groups to get involved in marine science as an option. So the internship runs for 10 weeks. And what's unique about this program, it's a part of a national Sea Grant effort, and students have an opportunity to participate in what is referred to as professional development. So they can go to webinars, they learn about other grant opportunities or scholarship opportunities, and it's a mentorship program. It's really very unique. This is my second year being involved with this program, and this year, and I'll go a little bit into her work later when we talk about hard clam, but the first year I had a partnership with another university, SUNY at Farmingdale, a professor by the name of Peter Park. So he was able to provide a field project or intern. And so he was our research faculty mentor, and then I served as extension to allow that student to have the full experience. This year, my intern is working with me on our hard clam to do, she's actually been hired as the communication specialist for hard clam project, and I will go into what the hard clam project is about momentarily. But this is another opportunity where students can work with both researchers and other professionals over the 10-week to have that exposure and experience in the field. Any questions? Oh, you're a good group. Okay, so let's get into what I think is more interesting. That was interesting, but this is like what we do. So when I was hired way back, I was hired to conduct outreach, to provide outreach support for the Long Island Sound lobster mortality. This was, it was the Long Island Sound Lobster Research Initiative. That was the name of the effort, which was funded in response to a mass mortality event that pretty much wiped out our fishery in Long Island Sound. Before the die-off, our Long Island Sound fishery was the third largest in the country. At that time, we were pulling in maybe close to 8 million pounds on each side of the sound. After the die-off, our production landings fell precipitously, and at one point we were like below 200,000 pounds. Now we're up to about 1 million pounds. Needless to say, that's a fishery that has not come back. It's very sad, but I like to think of it as it was also a very unique time to be in, in fisheries, where you could observe a fishery that literally just disappears in front of your eye. The event occurred over the span of less than a year. And within that time, the fishermen, it caused a lot of displacement. Fishermen have not really recovered from that emotionally. Recently, we did an oral history project trying to talk to fishermen about their experience, and it's still very painful for them. Several fishermen did adapt in that they moved to another fishery. Some went on to fish for whelks. Others kind of held on to their license with the hope that the fishery would come back. But here we are 20 years later, and it's just not there. So it's a sad, this is a tragedy of the commons if I've ever heard of one. But at the time when we did the research, so the funding came from Congress to support research into the causes of the lobster die-off. And the underlying causes at the time was attributed to the increase in, so let me backtrack. Lobsters in Long Island Sound are actually living on the fringe. If you go further south for lobsters, you have to go further offshore and deeper waters. American lobsters are cold-blooded species. In Long Island Sound, this is the furthest inshore distribution. Conditions there are not exactly conducive for lobsters. It's not like Maine where you have deep waters and it's cool. Long Island Sound is just like, it was, I don't want to say an anomaly, but it really wasn't their natural range. what researchers observed over time was a gradual increase in the bottom water temperatures of something to the order of 2 degrees. And on top of that, Long Island Sound in certain places does have the problem of hypoxia. Hypoxia means low dissolved oxygen. What happened was that there were a sequence of winters that it was unusually warm. So lobsters were under tremendous stress, already living in a place that they really don't belong. And then they had this, prolonged further stressful conditions. And what happened was that it was just too much for the lobsters, and they just, there was a paramoeba that was also found. And the researchers just concluded that the driving force was indeed temperature, but also everything worked together, both the low dissolved oxygen and that paramoeba, and it was just too much for the lobsters, and it caused that catastrophic decline. I was having a conversation with Jan earlier, and I said, at the time, our researchers, they were really ahead of themselves. They were really ahead of the times. They attributed the cause to temperature. That was before climate change was a thing. Climate science has really evolved in the last 20 years. Way back then, although the researchers didn't use the phrase climate and change, they were looking at the temperature connection. Interestingly, I like to think of this as my baptism by fire, because when I came and started working on this project, there was also another extraneous factor that was going on here. The lobstermen, they were involved in a lawsuit. They sued the pesticide company because it's in New York, we were always doing spraying for mosquito control, and then the lobstermen, they kind of correlated it, the die-off with the spraying. As a part of the research, we did do a lot of, there was a water circulation model that we did, a hydrodynamics model, that proved that, in terms of the volume in Long Island Sound and the concentrations of pesticides that were going in, there was no way that the lobsters could have died. And there were other things. Unfortunately, at the time, the fishermen, and I get it, they had, the lawsuit. So, they kind of said, no, we don't believe what the scientists are saying. I was very surprised. And I was trying to find the article, but I couldn't. But in earlier this year, there was, because I think it's a 20th year, so reporters are still going back and revisiting, and they interviewed fishermen. And one fisherman who was from back in the day, he actually admitted, yes, it's temperature. Only took them 20 years, right? And I'm going to go into like behavior change, which is another thing that a goal for us in extension. But like I said, for me, this was like baptism by fire. It was like, and it's, I really do feel for these, fishermen, because if you put yourselves in their position, your livelihood, you just look at it and it's like disappearing. It's a very scary thing for them, but, and it's really sad that we no longer have this iconic species, but, let's hope that we don't see the same fate in other fisheries. So another program that I've been involved with is safety at sea training. And this is one of the fun ones that I did, where we provided training to commercial fishermen, in basic safety techniques. This also allowed us to have the Coast Guards do their inspection of the gear that they use. And that was a fun thing to do. I remember so this was a partnership with the U.S. Coast Guard and Cornell Cooperative of Suffolk County. I remember it was great because the Coast Guard at the time, they brought in all their heavy equipment. So they had like a firefighting thing. So, they were lighting fires. All guys seem to like fires for some reason. They had like a vessel that you could do like repairs. And, what if you have like a hole in your boat, how do you can repair it? So it was very interactive, very engaged. Fishermen loved that. We got an award for that. So that was really cool and fun. So Another thing that I'm involved with, and I will get into the other, some of the other programs later that I'm not involved with, but my colleagues. So I mentioned that I do some work with aquaculture in terms of shellfish farming. And we had a grant from the National Sea Grant to develop a course, a training course for prospective shellfish farming investors. So for these people, so one of my colleagues, Greg Rivara at Cornell Cooperative, he also does aquaculture. And in New York, we have a shellfish leasing program. And so Greg mentioned that he was always getting calls from people in the city who said, well, I want to start a shellfish farm, but I want to do it part-time. Well, Greg said, no, shellfish farming isn't exactly something you do part-time, it's hard work, right? You have to go out, you have to check your cages, you have to, make sure the animals are not foul, the cages aren't foul. It's a commitment. So the other thing that we also noticed was that the county mentioned that they were experiencing a high attrition rate for these new farmers. So it takes a little over a year to do the permitting, which is, it's quite an investment. But then for whatever reason, not many, there was a significant number of new farmers who just didn't seem prepared, whether they just ran out of steam or they ran out of money, for whatever reason, they just stopped their operations. So the way the lease agreement works is that one of the conditions is that the county will give that new farmer, the lessee, 18 months to plant seed. A seed is the shellfish. If they fail to plant seed within that grace period, then the county has the right to go in and it's actually a repossession because shellfish underwater lands is treated as real property. So the county will go in and they will take legal action, just like a house repossession. You hire lawyers, you go to the courts, takes up a lot of time and effort, and it gets very expensive. So, we all got together and we said, well, why don't we have some sort of a course that's really meant to target these people who are interested in becoming shellfish farmers, but they really don't have a clue as to what it involves. And so we applied and we got the grant. So the way this course works is that we have this online course, which talks about the basics of shellfish farming. It goes into like the history of shellfish farming in New York, which is actually very interesting if you're into history. It talks a little bit about how you start a business, talks about, how do you go about applying for a permit? There are different programs run by municipalities, whether it's county or state, so there are several options. We talk about, basic biology. If you have a shellfish, how do you know the animal is sick from healthy? What do you do when you have these animals, the operations, what kind of data you record? So the course is, and another thing we talk about is HACCP, which is and I'll get into that, the HACCP, HACCP stands for I have to see it. I'll get to it momentarily. I have to see it on paper, but we'll get into that. But that is seafood safety. It's about managing the risk of pathogens when you're handling seafood. So what we do in the course pretty much is we give an overview of what are the basic requirements. It's not enough for you to start a farm. It's just enough information for you to decide, is this really something I want to do, which is very important. Before you start putting in the effort of filling out the paperwork, paying the fees, and having the agency put their time into it. Think about it. Is this something you really want to do? The second part of this is to have a in-person training where we bring the students who indicate that they still want to continue with this shellfish permitting. We say, okay, you can come to part two. Part two, you come for a day. We do more hands-on things, with the farm. You can tinker with an engine. You can actually pull those bags or cages, that's the word I'm looking for, which is, it's not an easy feat. You know, they get to see some of the basic equipment that you use in shellfish farming, etc. Now, if at the end of that, we ask, well, do you still want to do shellfish farming? If they say yes, the other part, which I'm still waiting to get funding, and I'm optimistic that we will get it, but we do have plans to introduce an internship program where we would have those students work with a grower for maybe about a month or so, you know, just to get that real time kind of experience. So that's really much the plan. So this model is, it comes from HACCP, and I'll get into HACCP momentarily. With the exception of the internship component, that's something that was suggested by industry, because we engaged industry to help us review the course content. And industry said, well, you know, one of the problems we have is that seasonal labor, you know, becomes an issue. And wouldn't it be great if some of these students would come out and work with us? So, you know, we'd like to get the funding to do that, you know, because that could be like a win-win for everyone. So, you know, we're excited with that, and, you know, we'll keep you posted. So the other big project that I'm involved with, it's this hard clam selective breeding project. And I mentioned that we have an intern that's now working as our communication specialist. So again, this is a project that's funded through our National Sea Grant. They had a competition and they selected, you know, projects to fund throughout the network. So our project, it's a national collaborative. We have researchers from Florida, there's Florida, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Virginia that's involved with this, and they're shellfish biologists. Who I have there is Dr. Bassem Alam. He's the lead research PI. He's based at Stony Brook University. And the goal of this project is to try to develop resistant strains for industry. Industry has the problem with respect to certain environmental stressors that do affect their livestock, and that causes mortality, which causes a loss in their you know, their revenue and their profit margins. So what these researchers are doing is they have been conducting genomic sequencing. They have actually published the genome, which we're very excited. That allows them to identify strains that possess these resilient genes that gives them that, you know, special ability. So I don't want to give the impression that this is GMO. This is not genetically modified organism. It's very different. These animals, they exist naturally. We just have to find a way to identify them in the field, which is why they conducted the genomic work. So now that we know what to look for, we've selected those animals, and we're going to hold those animals and use them for breeding. And then, you know, the plan is that those progenies and seeds, we will ultimately get them to commercial hatcheries, which will be supplying these resistant seeds to industry. So that's our long-term goal. We do have a website, www.hardclamhub.org. If you're interested, you can go look at it. So our intern is now our communication specialist for the summer, and her job is to try to help us to develop some materials to educate industry and the public about what we're doing. As you can imagine, genomics, it's a very dense subject area. So she has her work cut out for her. She's doing very well. I'm very impressed with hers, but, you know, she works directly with the researchers. You know, she writes up her story, she brings it to the researchers, and there's that engagement with, you know, practicing researchers and other professionals. Kind of the same thing I would do. You know, when I do outreach, I have to write it down, and then I have to go to researchers, and then it is a process. I work with designers, graphic designers, or videographers, and, you know, our intern is doing the same thing. So we're very excited, and she seems to be enjoying this one. And we do hope in future to have more additional interns. I know that we've been funded to do a second phase of this project. So at some point we will, in 2023, we'll probably put out an announcement for, you know, students to apply for this. So this again is coming through our community engagement internship. So another thing that, oh, I'm still on mute, I apologize. Another thing that I'm involved with is this whole issue of trying to engage more underrepresented groups in marine sciences. And one way to do that is through our annual marine camp. So Catherine is the person who makes this happen in terms of the funding, and she's been a big supporter of this program. There are times when I feel so, my bones ache and I don't feel I can go ahead. And Kathy said, "Aren't we doing camp?" And I said, "Sure." Yes, it's great. It's a good program. The way this program works is that we partner with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Nassau County, and this program really works through youth service organizations. So there are organizations that will have programs for youths who are at risk, or just after school programs, and they're always looking for things for their kids to do. So they were so happy to hear about this program that we have, which really it's it's offered 2 days a week in the summer. We go to the Jones Beach Nature and Energy and Nature Center, which is in the state park. It's a wonderful facility. Kids get, and it's very hands-on. So we have kids, they're seining, doing many of the things that you do here, identifying species, and they're doing nature walks and all of that great stuff. And it's so fulfilling to have this program, because many times when you see the kids, this is like the first time they've been to the beach. And I know this is probably something, students here, you kind of take for granted, but, where we work in New York, although we're on the island and it only takes you like within 10 minutes, you hit the coast in some places. A lot of these kids have never been to the ocean. So it's like, I remember one group, they were telling me they were coming over on their bus, and the kids, they're talking, and then once they hit the Robert Moses Causeway, which is our bridge leading down to this barrier island, they all stopped talking, and they were like so overwhelmed with the vista and the views, and they're like, yeah. So that's it's really a fulfilling program for us, and we love it. And I'll still keep on going until my bones give out. Hopefully not soon. So the other program that I mentioned is our community engagement, engaged internship, and also the law policy fellows. Those are programs that are funded directly through our director's budget. She also is very supportive of these types of training, so that is my student from the first cycle, and you can just barely see Peter Park, who's in the, on your right. So they were involved in a seinen program to try to standardize seinen that's used in community science. So the idea is that there are many groups that do conduct seinen events in New York City and even on Long Island. And they can add up in terms of the inventory that they're bringing in. So Peter had the idea to try to conduct work to standardize the way they're doing this work, so that they can use the data for actual research. So Bella helped to design the survey instrument, and that was like, again, she took the lead in doing that. We trained her in Qualtrics, so it was very exciting. And Peter put out his a survey, and I think he's now getting ready to start his analysis. So that was very fulfilling. So some of the other work that's being done by other specialists. So I have here Mike Ciramella. So Mike is the seafood specialist, and one of his biggest program is the seafood hazard. Now I see if I can say. So it's the hazard analysis critical control point. And really all that is identifying risks for foodborne pathogens. So for seafood production, it is like a process. You know, you take your fish you catch your fish and you put your fish on a vessel. But then when your vessel goes to a fish processor, that's where you can have the risk of contaminants and pathogens. And it's a question of food safety for public consumption. So Mike's work is, you know, trying to identify places, points along that production line where there are risks. HACCP is actually a mandatory requirement by the federal government. So every seafood processor needs to have this training. So Mike he's very busy. I mentioned that we did our e-course training. We use the HACCP model. So the way HACCP works, they too have this online component, and then they have that one day in person. Mike's, he's doing very well. They're always very busy every day. And HACCP, unlike my little course, HACCP, it's for the entire, anyone who wants to import fish in the US has to have HACCP certification. So in terms of his audience, it's well beyond our borders. I mean, he will get requests from India, different countries. He's now in Jakarta doing training. So there you go for the potential of extension careers. The other thing Mike does too is he's doing a lot of work with the Seafood Council and trying to engage, you know, those stakeholders in, you know, having a better way to navigate permitting and etc. So, you know, I'm just trying to touch on a few things because I don't want to be too long. So Dave White. So when I first joined Sea Grant, I was like the youngest person in the room. My colleagues at the time, they had already done like 20 years, 20 plus years, you know, and some. So Dave was one of the persons that was been in staff. So many of those that I came and saw, they have retired. Dave is one of the last remaining ones. And unfortunately, Dave just announced his plans for retirement in this coming fall. So Dave's done like, I think 35 years with Sea Grant. So Sea Grant, as you mentioned, Jennifer, it's a place where, you know, staff, they come and they like it and they can establish a successful and a fulfilling career. Dave is certainly an example of that and a success story. So Dave's portfolio, it's more working with the boating communities in the Great Lakes. He's does a lot of work with safe boating, does a lot of the expos upstate, and he's always on the radio upstate. So, you know, I'm sure he's going to be missed and he's leaving very big shoes to fill. So another program that we do is trying to engage in citizen science. Citizen science, it's a very powerful tool. And unfortunately, over the years, we've heard sometimes researchers and managers, they kind of shy away from using that data. But I'm pleased to see that there are now efforts to try to formalize the citizen engagement and citizen science. So this program, MyCoast, was just announced by one of our specialists, Jessica, who's actually based in the Hudson. And if you have the time, you can go look at MyCoast, but it's really trying to get residents to report flooding events. So that's, you know, very exciting. They're forming a big database, you know, and hopefully over time we can use that work. So that's just a tip of the iceberg about the types of disciplines that's addressed in marine extension. But one of the things that I would like to say is that we do all, even though we work on different topics, disciplines, we have several things in common. Primarily, our job is to bridge that gap between research and the end users. That's what we do. Science isn't very helpful if all it does is it stays in the publications and, you know, nobody ever uses it or knows the findings, right? So our job is really to try to get that information out there beyond the scientific community. More importantly, ideally, what we'd like to do is have some behavior change. And what does that mean? It means that end users will use that information, you know, whether it's a new widget to improve how they, I don't know, deal with waste or whatever, you know, that's our end game. Another thing that we do a lot of is we do training, we do workshops, developing websites and fact sheets and videos, digital media, etc. So I think overall we're using this new term in extension, and that is we're talking about operationalizing research, and all that means is applying research, taking that research out of the university into to the end users. This is like our shot from one of our Zoom meetings when we went remote. It looks like the Brady Bunch, like by 10. And I think several of those staff have already left. So, we have a big program. So I'd like to spend a few minutes to talk about what are some of the challenges we have with communications, which is a big part of our job. So I consider myself as an educator and, more importantly, as a science communicator. But, when I first started, communications was very different. Now, 20 years later, the public has such a tremendous amount of access to information. You have the internet, you have Google. I mean, like Google, think about it. Google, it's a noun, right? You're very important if your noun is now a verb. We're Googling, right? It's a big thing. And there's so many other ways to get information. But the other thing that we talk about with information is everybody's putting information out there, but is the information reliable? Is it questionable? Is it fiction? And that's where Sea Grant tries to separate ourselves. We are based on research, and we would like to think that the research results, it's being used for decision making, and that's just a catch-all phrase. It's using that information. So the question that we've been talking about in extension over the years is, how do you remain relevant in this new environment? Where the information market, it's so highly competitive. Everybody's doing extension now. When I first started, Sea Grant was the only one, or one of the few organizations doing extension. Now an NGO is doing extension, everybody's doing extension. So how do we stand apart? So a couple of things I'd like to bring to you as students, and it's not only for extension, but also when you do your work and when you're writing your thesis. I think this is a good practice. One of the things that we're talking about more in extension, it's diversity. We're saying diversity, equity, and inclusion and access. But what does that mean? It's not only in extension we're seeing it. I put up there the screenshot from Sesame Street. I was so stoked to learn that Sesame Street, which is something I grew up with, they introduced a new character, Amira, who is in a wheelchair. Isn't that awesome? Right? Who would have thought? I love the graphic at the bottom because it shows diversity. It's not comprehensive, but it's a good start. You see people who are, different size. There's a person in a wheelchair. There's a person with an artificial limb. There's a person with tattoos. There's same sex. It's like, this is our community, right? And I put this up there because I think this is a very important point. When we're writing, when we're communicating, we should see diversity as a leverage. You can use it to your advantage. You write your story so that you can engage your audience and you make it relatable. Now, it's hard for a person to change their behavior if they can't see how they're connected to the problem or the issue, right? So I think it seems a little bit minor to have these images, but there's a phrase, a picture says 1,000 words, and this is it. You put the right graphic, you connect with the audience, and you get their attention. And that's a good start. So another thing that I would like to caution us about is it's to try to avoid oversimplification of issues, because it's a double-edged sword. I've seen where writers have tried to simplify concepts, but at the point where they kind of compromise the integrity of the information, and that's not desirable. So this is where I'm going to take a little bit of break because I have a little bit of exercise for us. So I'm going to show us a little video and I'm going to ask some questions afterwards. It's only like a 3.5-minute video, so it's not going to be too long. Hopefully this works. And then we're going to try to critique it. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing momentarily just so we can. And then I have to make sure that I am here. Just a second. It should be up. Okay, that's it. All right, so now I'm going to try to share again. Where's my Zoom? Share screen. This one. Share. Excellent. All right, so please don't pay too much attention to the authors of the video. I just want us to look at the video, read the text, and then afterwards I'm going to have a little quick discussion. So this is about how oysters filter feed. Excellent. So, all right, let me just get rid of that one. So, Okay, so I'm going to go back and share my screen. Oh, sorry. Thought I cut that out. Sorry. So now we're going to share. Okay. So back to this matter of oversimplification. What did you think of the video? Nice video? Good? Good, right? Nice. All right. So I got this video and I looked at it and I had the same thing too. Yeah, this is a nice video. But then the extension part of me, I started to look a little bit closer. And why is this not advancing? All right, so I have to do it the long way. There were some text statements that were made that really kind of was nagging at me. So I kind of highlighted and I went back to the researchers and I asked these questions. And, you know, it might seem like a small minor word, but, you know, for me, I guess I'm just too critical. So the statement there, you know, I had a problem with one word there. Can anyone suggest which one it is? Thank you. Ding, ding, ding. See, you're undergrad and you know this. And so it was bothersome. I slept on it a whole night and then it really was under my skin. And the next day I had to write the researcher. And so the question does become then, is digestion a passive action? Is it voluntary or is it neither? Because you're using the word decide. And from what I know of an oyster, it's, and Jan, you can help us out there. I'm thinking it's more, I don't want to say mechanical, but it's certainly not a process that I would use decide. Just doesn't seem like the right word. And I get it. They're trying to connect with the audience and that's fine. But, at the same time, we have to be very careful of our words because our words do have meaning. And when there's someone like me, it gets under my skin and maybe I know I'm anal retentive. So that was one. And will this go now? Which word do you have a problem with? Choose. Yeah, see, not so hard, right? And the other question I have is, well, if you're saying they choose, how do they make that distinction between organic and inorganic particles? What's the selection process there? Isn't it just the cilia and it's like particle size and seems it's more mechanical than anything else, right? And then I was told, well, there were studies that showed like glass beads, the oysters, they will reject the glass bead and they will take the other particle. But then I'm saying, but that's still mechanical, right? It's a glass bead. It's like, I don't see why we're using these words. And that I was just hung up on the words. So here, it gets a little bit technical. I had a problem, really my issue was more with dirt. And where I was coming from is when a non-technician uses the word dirt, it can mean many things. I know that when I was working in the mangrove, that detritus, a non-technician would call that dirt. But Jan, is that dirt? Exactly, it's organic particulate matter. It's not dirt, but a non-technician will say dirt. And I get what you're saying, and that's why I say we have to be very careful not to oversimplify the message, because then you can run into problems. And again, I'm just coming from this perspective of, for CGRET, we try to be the purveyor of science, and our job is really to ensure that the information is accurate. So it's a great video. It's just like choice of words. I would have probably done it a little bit differently. So that's your little exercise. So my journey, and then we can finish this up. Well, I don't talk too much about myself. I'm like that type of person, but can anyone identify that gentleman in the picture? So not the older, not the older people, students only. You know who that gentleman is? I hear it. Come on. No? Exactly. Mike, you want to say? I heard you saying it, so you can say it now. Yep, yep. So this is the gentleman that got me all stoked on marine biology. And there's,
See the shows red news over there?
I'm sure he must have been
That is
here.
a scoop on the drug show. A lot of students don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's also a personal connection there too, because this is a program that my dad and I we used to watch it every time it came on, you know, and I have such fond memories of that. So honestly, I wanted to be a vet, and specifically I wanted to do felines, big cats. Well, I didn't do the vet school thing for whatever, I think at the time, and this, I know some students, they can't wait to get away from home. I wasn't one of those. I was an only child. I actually like being home with my parents. For some, I'm weird that way. So at the time to do vet studies, I mean, my parents were very supportive, but I didn't want to go away to another country, another campus, which was in Trinidad at the time, to do my work. So I said, okay, the next best thing is marine biology. You know, it's still animals. I like marine stuff, so why not do it? So I ended up doing both of my degrees at the University of the West Indies. My first degree, as Jennifer mentioned, I have a double majors in marine biology and zoology. And then afterwards, I was very fortunate in that I was able to work on a project that was funded by the government of Canada to help our government to develop their data collection programs. So I was, you know, collecting data to do tropical stock assessment. So my advisor was Anthony Coslow, who was based at Cicero, which is in Australia at the time. I'm sure by now he's retired. Once I was finished with my master's, I went and I worked with CARICOM Fisheries. So CARICOM, the easiest way for me to describe it, CARICOM, it's like the EU for the Caribbean. So they're member states, which are these countries. So, you know, we were doing a fisheries program, which was working with the departments of fisheries in all of these countries to develop a standard data collection program. So it was like we were training staff to measure fish, identifying fish. How do you input measurements into you know, a statistical software, and then, you know, move on to doing VPA analysis and all of that great stuff, which I really haven't used since then. You know, so, you know, obviously that was doing a lot of training, workshops, etc. It was actually a good time in my life. And if you had to do this kind of work, I would say do it when you're young, because it was so much traveling. But you know, it afforded me the opportunity to meet some of the like really established fisheries stock assessment scientists, you know, people like Daniel Pauly, Billy Kristen, John Monroe. You know, these are people that I would sit with at a table. And, you know, at the time, you know, it was like I was awestruck. I still am awestruck, you know, but, you know, if collectively, if you put all the publications that these gentlemen have, these scientists have done, you could probably fill this room, you know. Yes. So I worked with that program for 8 years, and then I came to Sea Grant. I got married actually, and because I got tired of all that traveling, literally. And then I joined Sea Grant, and that's where I've been ever since for 20 odd years. So that's really my story. It's been a very rewarding career. I do encourage students to consider marine science. Like I said, it doesn't have to be fisheries. As you could see, you know, we have so many different disciplines. When I first started, we didn't have an offshore wind energy specialist. Who would have thought, right? Now we have one. So you know, the field is, it's really growing, you know, and it is quite fulfilling. And maybe, oh, so this is my last slide. So maybe this is where I get on the not my soap opera, but I'm, you know, talking what I've learned. I think I've learned something. So, and I know that at this point in your careers, your academic studies, you're probably wondering, well, where do I want to go? And my advice is that, so you've seen the type of work I'm doing. Now you've heard my training. I'm not using VPA analysis. I left that from when, you know, so your path, everybody's path is going to be different. and that's okay. And I scratched out marine science because it's really any career. I'm pretty sure if you talk to an actuary or any other professional, they'll tell you that what they trained and how they got there, it's going to be a different story, and that's all right. But one thing I would urge you to do is never discount the value of each opportunity that comes your way. Use it to your advantage. It's not a waste of time if you learn something and you grow from it. I think that's very important. I've heard students, like last week, we were meeting with some graduate students at Stony Brook, and one young gentleman said, well, I don't know why I'm just so afraid that I'm learning all of this and I won't be able to apply it or use it. And, I pretty much said the same thing to him. In order for you to, even if you're an extension, you need to understand the basic fundamentals so you can explain concepts, so you can sit in a room with researchers and know what they're talking about. And that's very important. So you might be doing, and I don't mean to pick on you, Jan, but evolutionary biology that has its place. I was talking to Jan, and I've had tables where a fisherman has come up to me and it was a tautog. I remember I had some fact sheets. One was with a tautog fish, which is well, it's also commercial, but it's a big recreational fish on Long Island. And so the angler, he wanted to know, well, what do you really know? And he said to me, well, this tautog, what does it eat? And I fell back on my evolutionary biology and I said, well, you see the teeth, how they're fused, that's for crushing. So most likely it's going to be shellfish. And I went through all the features and he said, oh, you actually know what you're talking about. That's basic biology, right? It sounds mundane, but that's how you build your knowledge base. I think really, and this is the most important one, failure only comes when you give up on yourself. Never give up on yourself. It's okay if you try something in terms of a career and you find that this isn't for you and you go on to something else. Just, that's not giving up in my book. You tried it, you decided it's not for you, and you're going to do something else. That's fine, as far as I'm concerned. Your parents, I'm not so sure. They're different. Always be willing to change and adapt. I think I'm a perfect example. I started out doing when I first joined Sea Grant. Now I'm like dabbling with people doing genomic research. I'm helping with shellfish. I'm looking at marine debris and different things. Your opportunity, when it's out there, just be willing to try and see where it leads you. I think another important thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that as you establish your career, never forget about your family and your friends. You need to have that downtime in your personal time. It's very, very important because, I always say you should love your job, but you should love your job. It's nice. You want to be happy going into your place of work and doing your job, but that your job shouldn't be who you are. It's just a part of who you are. So, those are my words of wisdom, and I thank you for your time. I think I went over 20 minutes, but I have my email address. If you need to find me, there's a web URL, and if you have questions, now's the time we can open it up for general discussion, and if you're not too tired.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Oh, so the question is, who's the intended audience for the video that was shown? So I'm not on the project, although Sea Grant is listed as one of the funders, which is why I kind of spoke my piece because the logo was there. But I think it was really just for the general public. So this project, it's looking at shellfish restoration. So it's not targeted. So those shellfish, it's not really meant for consumption. It's more like for reef building. So it's more obviously for industry, so they know not to go take the products, but also for the general public. Another question? You're all tired? Should I wear you out? So I have a question. From what you've learned in terms of the discipline, that I highlighted, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, do you see a potential in marine extension, or is it that you still want to go? Because I hear a lot of students, they talk about doing research and going into teaching, which is fine, but we also acknowledge the fact that research, there is a capacity in terms of university hiring, etc. Also, research is not an easy thing to stop. Doing the research is one part of it. Getting the grants is like a whole different exercise. Administering your grants, forget it. Dan, would you like to tell them about going to administration and the OSP and all that great stuff in the budget? It is quite a process. So my question is, given the fact that, you can still apply your training in different ways and still within, so the other thing I didn't share is that with extension, you can still do research. I get, so all the projects that I've highlighted, I've been involved with that grant funding. You can also apply for grants that you can do traditional research as extension. So, I don't want to give the impression that extension is just like having meetings, etc. Yes, that's a big part of it, but one thing I think that is really great about extension is that you pretty much build your work plan. And, one day I might be doing fisheries, and if something comes up, if it's in my area of expertise, I can pull together stakeholders and, you have meetings, and then when an opportunity comes, you involve the grant writing, and, you get to explore other avenues. But I don't consider extension as a dynamic field. It's as a stagnant field. It's very dynamic. It's very fluid. So my question is, do you see extension in a different light? Okay, yes or no? Who sees it as stagnant or let's see, who sees it as having potential? You can raise your hand. Not bad. Not bad.
I think your work is done.
No, but if you have any questions, you don't have to reach out to our program. You can always reach out to your own state grant program. They have similar opportunities. And our programs are very similar, but I really think that, and I choose my words very carefully with the title. Marine extension is that underlooked, I don't want to say forgotten because we're not forgotten, but it's oftentimes underlooked, in terms of career. But, I think I have no complaints about, coming on this path. Considering where I started, I'm pretty happy. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. So don't forget, once you leave this island, you can still participate in these rock talks because most of them are Zoom. So you can actually join us when you're not on island. And next week is Hannah Wright, and she is a brand new postdoc at UNH, and she's interested in trace metals in the ocean and how it impacts symbiotic relationships, especially in Africa. So that will be next week. You can zoom in if you're not here. Good night.
Night.